Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He made paths before the big people and saw the little people arriving. He was here before the kings and the graves and the barrow-wights. When the elves passed westward, Tom was here already, before the seas were bent. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside. Hey friends, welcome to Seeking Stories, where we unlock the secrets of your favorite books and movies. We are on a journey of reading through every single chapter of The Fellowship of the Ring and just doing a little tiny bit of a deep dive, maybe not even a deep dive, a shallow dive into Tolkien's writing, talking about some things from both an audience perspective, from like a mythology and lore perspective, and from a perspective of what Tolkien was thinking when he was creating his world. So we are in the part of The Fellowship of the Ring where a lot of people stop reading, unfortunately. The story really does pick up after this chapter and the next chapter, but really after the story starts with, Bilbo and Frodo and the ring and Gandalf and, the few hobbits setting off on their journey, there is just some kind of wandering, and I've talked about that in the last few videos. And it's a lot of wandering and stopping, and a lot of wandering and stopping. And this is kind of the last little bit of that for a while, this in the next chapter. But throughout this part, we come across a character that a lot of people disregard a little bit, in part because the movie does gloss over his character. The character that we're talking about today, Tom Bombadil, is one of the most interesting characters in all of Lord of the Rings, for many reasons. One being that the Ring of Power does not seem to have any effect on him, and that he seems to be as old as the hills, literally, or even older. So who is Tom Bombadil, and how does he really play into the story at all? A few things I want to talk about here, and I'm going to pull some direct quotes from some research that I did, but Tom Bombadil really is what he says. He is, as old as really the earth in a way. And this becomes clear when you consider a few other lines from the story. When they caught his words again, they found that he had now wandered into strange regions beyond their memory, and beyond their waking though, into times when the world was wider and seas flow straight to the western shore. The world was wider. That's a really interesting tidbit because in the lore and mythology of Middle-earth, in the first age of Middle-earth, the land of Middle-earth was actually much wider, and there were many wars between elves and orcs and a Dark Lord who was even more evil than Sauron. And at some point in the story, and we're not going to get into it today, the world basically broke, and the western half of the Middle-earth literally flooded, and it's kind of like a punishment in a way. Too much to get into right here, but Tom Bombadil's basically saying he's old as the first age of Middle-earth, which is thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. So he's obviously not just a man. It was also clear that Tom had dealings with the elves, and it seemed that in some fashion, news had reached him from Gildor concerning the flight of Frodo. So, of course, we're in a part of Middle-earth where elves do not normally dwell at this point. We had Frodo encounter Gildor a few chapters ago, but elves don't really dwell at this part of Middle-earth. But we gain from this that Tom Bombadil not only knows the elves, but he has communication with them. Like, Frodo just met with Gildor a few days ago, and Tom Bombadil already has word from Gildor that he met Frodo on the road. So we know that Tom Bombadil has some connection with elves. So I want to delve into a couple of things. One from one of my favorite books is called The Tolkien Companion, and I showed it a few videos ago, but it's this great Tolkien encyclopedia. And I also want to look at J.R. Tolkien, Author of the Century by Tom Shippey, both who have some words on who Tom Bombadil may or may not be. According to the Tolkien Companion, the Old Forest was one of the last surviving reaches of the great primeval woods of the Elder Days, Bombadil's domain since the beginning. It was not recorded in the Shire what kind of creature Bombadil was, but it seems certain from all available evidence that he was a unique being, oldest and fatherless, as the elves deemed him. In the first age, he was known to the Eldar, who called him Erwain ben Adar, and acknowledged him as the oldest of all creatures. They considered him a benevolent spirit of the forest, a veritable incarnation of the ancient life force present there, under no laws but his own, acknowledging no master. So this actually kind of muddies things up even a little bit more potentially, but there are spirits in this world of Middle-earth. You have characters like the Valar and the Maiar, kind of like the higher and lesser gods of Middle-earth. Gandalf is one of the Maiar. He's one of the lesser gods who comes to Middle-earth in human form to help protect the realm and help defeat Sauron. And you have various characters and creatures like this who are kind of almost like deities in human form. And it's possible, Tolkien never comes out and says exactly, but Bombadil could be one of these characters who's just kind of a spirit in a way, living in Middle Earth, whose job really there, we don't know too much, but it could be to potentially take care of the forest, take care of the woods. We know that Tom Bombadil has been around since the Elder Days, since the First Age, and as the story grows, we learn that Tom Bombadil's domain at this point really encapsulates just the Old Forest, which is pretty tiny. If you look at the map at the beginning of the book, the Old Forest is a tiny little section of the world compared to even some of the greater forests of Middle Earth. So it could be that Tom Bombadil was a protector of the woods, a protector of the land, but we know that Tom Bombadil has a domain, and in his domain he stays and he protects and he lives and he helps that land flourish as much as possible and hopefully rid that land of some evil that's there. He really has no interest of the world to the outside of his realm, and that's one of the reasons why the ring has no hold over him at this point in the story. You know, when Frodo somehow is able to willingly give the ring over to him, and Tom Bombadil puts it on his finger and doesn't disappear, and then hands the ring right back. That in and of itself shows that Bombadil really is not, you know, of this world, so to speak. He knows his duty. He stays within the Old Forest with his wife Goldberry, and they tend to the land and they take care of it. He's a kind of exaltation of the earth, a nature spirit, and once again, a very English one. Cheerful, noisy, unpretentious to the point of shabbiness, extremely direct, apparently rather simple, not as simple as he looks. Everything he says is in sort of a verse. Tolkien may have got the idea from the Sing Wizards from the Finnish epic, the Kalevala. I would potentially argue, and maybe I'm reading into this just a little bit, that Bombadil is a version of Tolkien's self in a way. You know, Tolkien was as English as you could get in a lot of ways. He loved the land, he loved trees, as we learned about in the last video. He loved the idea of kind of things in his countryside kind of staying as they were. And I really do think in Tolkien's mind, what he's writing with Tom Bombadil protecting the woods is maybe potentially Tolkien vicariously saying, you know, this is me trying to protect what I know and love of my own world, of the world that I see changing too quickly. Bombadil is definitely a very interesting character. He definitely has a little bit of Deus Ex Machina in the story. He rescues the hobbits in this part of the story. He comes out of nowhere. He's not foreshadowed at all. But at the same time, he adds a layer of richness to the world by saying, you know, there are not just humans and elves and dwarves. There are people from other lands, there are spirits, there are people from, you know, that are ancient centuries and millennia old who are here to help protect the land. So I want to know in the comments below what your thoughts are on Tom Bombadil. But before we conclude this video, I do want to touch on one more thing that it's just kind of the elephant in the room in a way. The wandering, is excessive wandering to the point of almost no intention, is not over yet. We still have one more chapter of it, even though an important plot element does happen that really doesn't pay off to Return of the King. But I want you to consider this last little quote. This is also from Tom Shippey, by the way. Much of the activity of the hobbits in these sections comes not from their adventures, but from their repercussions. Feasting with the elves in the Shire, hot baths in Crickhollow, singing with Tom Bombadil, singing again in the common room of the Prancing Pony, which comes up in the next few chapters. It was a criticism of Tolkien's early drafts of Book 1, made by both Rayner Unwin and C.S. Lewis, that Tolkien found it too easy and too amusing just to let the hobbits chatter on. There was a faint sense that Tolkien was initially groping for a story and keeping himself going with a sort of travelogue. That is interesting. It's an interesting statement from the foremost Tolkien scholar, a person who absolutely adores Tolkien and has investigated his works and his manuscripts, and he's probably the most knowledgeable person, living person who knows about Tolkien. So I want to know your guys' thoughts though. If this is the case, if Tolkien really was groping for the story and just trying to, you know, figure out where the story was going, which we know that Tolkien started out writing Lord of the Rings without an outline. He wrote a lot and then went back and rewrote and then did that again and again and eventually found the story. And, you know, he found a great story. But do you think, in your opinion, whether you've read the book many times or this is your first time reading it, should Tolkien have gone back and rewritten this bit? Does this bit detract too much from the story of the Lord of the Rings, from the plot? It definitely wouldn't fly in, you know, modern day book. But, you know, seeing as how it was the kind of the front runner of modern fantasy as we know it, do you think Tolkien should have gone and cut it? I know it's sacrilegious to say to a lot of Tolkien fans, but just, you know, objectively, should Tolkien have gone and cut this section? Or do you think it adds a layer of richness to the story and a layer of peace to our own reading, a value of it by saying we don't always have to be rush, plot. We can have some travelogue wandering. Do you think it hurts or it helps? So I would love to hear your perspective as always. Drop a comment below, and when you've read the next chapter, the next video is right here.